Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel where I suddenly read 3 books a month and release half as many videos. So October did not go as planned. It was a crazy month, and what you need to know, I guess, is that October is my favorite month of the year, and it is also my favorite month to read because there's so much excitement generated around the books that I love reading all year round that I just get really hyped up about it, and I'm just super excited to read every October. And then this October happened. There was probably 2 weeks out of the year where sickness just cycled its way through my household and through my family, and that was crazy. And then another good chunk of my month was set aside to travel to South Carolina and be in my sister's wedding. I didn't get as much reading done on that trip as I wanted to. So basically, just not the October that I had planned, but that's okay. We'll persevere. We will get through this. We'll bounce back eventually. But I do want to tell you about the few books that I did manage to read in the month. These are all October related books. There is an additional book that I read, but it was an arc. It doesn't really count, and it's not horror or thriller. It's not an October kind of book, so I'll be talking about that one later. 3 books to completion, and then a half a book because I was halfway through a book when I realized it's November and I haven't released a video in who knows how long, and I just need to talk about stuff. So the book that I've left unfinished, though not DNF'd, is The Bad Seed by William March. And I started reading it because it is so widely referenced across horror of every type of media. So movies, television, books, anything with an evil child seems to bring up or reference The Bad Seed. And I just wanted to read it to say that I'd read it. I'm getting through it. It's not by any means a long book. Like, this should not be taking me forever. But it's different. You know, it was written so long ago, I think in the 1950s, that the language is different. The style is different. It's definitely not my taste. But I do have every intention of finishing it, though I'm moving on for right now. The first book that I read to completion in October was Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. And this book has a lot of love out there. There's a lot of people who really enjoy this book. It's got critical acclaim. And I'm definitely in the minority when I say that it didn't do much for me. It's the story of 4 horror authors coming together in a notoriously haunted location to be interviewed by a mega fan of the genre. Based on that synopsis, based on my understanding of the book going into it, I expected something pretty different. My problems are for the overall arc of the story, because without giving anything away, I'm under the impression that these 4 horror authors are going to this haunted house and that craziness will ensue. But that's not actually what happened. And I feel okay revealing this information because I think you should know this going into Kill Creek if you're at all interested in reading it. They go to this haunted house and like nothing happens. The first half of the book is all about buildup, and it keeps getting you excited for something that's about to happen, but nothing happens. So in that regard, one letdown after another just kept putting a sour taste in my mouth. Then the group actually leaves this haunted house, goes their separate ways, and other things start to happen. There was one scene in the middle that was really engaging and really creepy and really gross. But it didn't even involve what I would consider a primary character. That I feel like this person was a secondary character, and it was she stole it with this scene for sure. But I'm having a hard time reconciling the importance of this scene to the actual story itself. So there was that, but then I had to wait even longer for really intense action, thrills, and scares. After some time apart, the four do reunite back in the haunted house, and that's where everything happens for the book at the end. And I mean, that's where everything happens. And that's where Scott Thomas throws the kitchen sink at us, because while the first half of the book was tedious because nothing happened, the climax and the last part of the book was tedious because one thing after another kept happening. The climax was so long that I found myself going, oh my gosh, like, wrap it up already. Where's our resolution? And so that was, I just feel like the story was told in a way that I didn't really like. Like, all of that intensity in the last few bits of the book needed to be spread out, in my opinion. And like I said, I'm definitely in the minority here. The one part of the book that I did actually like was the epilogue. I think that it contains an interesting twist, and the epilogue actually makes the whole book make sense. The realization comes in the epilogue, like what all of that book was for is contained in the epilogue, and that makes me a little nervous as well. Like, I don't really think that so much should hinge on the epilogue. I feel like if you don't know why you've been reading the book by the time the climax has sort of dispersed, then maybe there's an issue. But again, a lot of people like it. A lot of critics really like it. So again, this is probably just me. I will say that as far as the characters are concerned, I was happy to see the different types of horror authors represented. There's the iconic horror author with this legacy and this huge body of work. There's the shock value horror author who writes explicit and gratuitous scenes in order to, you know, shock readers into spending more money, basically. There's the Christian horror author who tries to write scary stories but keep them rooted in this certain amount of innocence. And then our protagonist is actually the horror author that saw great success from one novel and is struggling to replicate it. None of them were really likable exactly, but I'm glad that those types of characters were in the novel. I just don't think that that really speaks to how amazing the novel is, or how amazing the author is. So it was just an okay book for me. I really struggled with it. I almost DNF'd it, but not because I hated it, just because I did find it tedious, and at least it did get exciting in the end. Another so-so book for me, I also read Hide and Seek by Jack Ketchum. And this is the second Jack Ketchum book that I've read, the first being The Girl Next Door. And the problems that I had with The Girl Next Door definitely came along and reared their ugly heads in Hide and Seek. Again, that being the majority of the book spent in build-up, spent in story development, spent in, you know, things that I don't necessarily consider to be characteristic of horror novels, though apparently maybe I'm wrong. With action being isolated to the very end of the book. Hide and Seek is the story of a townie, a local man who starts a summer fling with a vacationer that turns into kind of this really intense relationship, and he spends a lot of time hanging out with her and her vacationing friends. Then in this town is this legendary, I don't know if they look at it as a haunted house, but definitely this location that has a lot of creepy backstory. And one night the friend group decides that it's a really good idea to go play hide and seek in this house. And from there, all of the bad things happen. So this book is not where The Girl Next Door is told primarily from the perspective or through the lens kind of a young person. This is a more adult book. It's, you know, from the perspective of an adult. It's definitely more explicit and contains more mature content. I struggle to say that because The Girl Next Door is pretty mature, but I mean outside of the horrific stuff. So when horror isn't happening, there's still some adult content in Hide and Seek that wasn't necessarily present in The Girl Next Door. I think that Jack Ketchum does a really good job with tone and with playing with the reader's trust and mistrust of characters. Obviously, a lot of time is spent on development of those characters, etc. But again, the action, the dramatic things, the horrific things of the book, I just would prefer a book to spread that stuff out. And those two things are not great examples of that at all. Lastly, the third book that I read to completion is the dark romance novel Pestilence by Laura Thalassa. I believe that's how you say it, Laura Thalassa. So this really intrigued me. I wanted to keep all of my reading dark for the month, even the romance stuff. But this Pestilence is the first book in what's intended to be a 4-book series about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse finding love. It sounds really hokey when I say it that way, but essentially that's what it is. I found this to be a completely intriguing concept, and I so had to pick this book up and read it, and I have every intention of reading the others as well. I liked this book. I'm not going to say a ton, but I liked it. I think probably the concept carried this book for me. It's essentially the story of Pestilence, the horseman that spreads disease and plague around the globe, and a Canadian firefighter named Sarah who volunteers to try to kill Pestilence and end his attack, so to speak, on the world. Now, obviously, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse can't be killed. Come on, let's be real here. Completely overlooked by Sarah. And instead, he captures her and is determined to show her suffering, to make her suffer for the attempt on his life. This book is gross. Like, this book has some really dark and explicit scenes in it. I think maybe the paranormal element kept me from thinking that it was as dark as some of the more realistic dark romances that I've read. So it's gross, don't get me wrong. Like, it's definitely reads like an anti-hero romance where, you know, there's this guy and he does terrible things, yet there's one woman in all of the land who manages to reveal his redeeming qualities. Again, I enjoyed it, and they just, what's standing in the way of this being truly phenomenal is the unanswered questions. But it's book 1 of 4, so I kind of feel like I'll appreciate this book more once I've read the entire series. For now, while this book has its own arc and the story of these two here, this heroine and this hero is resolved, I feel like there's so many unanswered questions about this interesting concept that I really hope get addressed in books 2 through 4. It is a beautiful cover, by the way. Like, this cover is what first caught my eye, and while it doesn't really look like something that I would read, I just thought it was gorgeous. And then when I realized what these books were about, I was hooked. Totally into reading all about it. So that's it. Shortest recent reads video in history. And full disclosure, I have also not read The Troop by Nick Cutter, which was the Pick My Book selection for October. So I'm not throwing that goal aside. Like, I fully intend to read it. I also intend to read a lot of nonfiction in November because apparently that's the cool thing to do. And look for the Pick My Book video for November containing all nonfiction books. I'll read whatever you choose, and hopefully things go better in November than they did in October. Thank you for sticking it out with me. If you have any questions about the books that I mentioned in this video, leave those in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.